The order came without ceremony, spoken in a voice so calm it was almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Take the baby to the river. Do not come back until it is done. Joanna stood where she was, her body frozen while her arms tightened around the newborn pressed against her chest. She felt his warmth, his fragile weight, the faint flutter of his breath against her skin. He smelled of milk and earth and something new, something untouched by the cruelty that ruled the plantation. She did not cry out. She did not beg. Years of survival had taught her that sound only invited punishment. Silence was the only shield she had ever been allowed. Mistress Malvina had already turned away, her long skirt brushing the wooden floor as if the child no longer existed. In her eyes, the baby was not a life. He was a mistake. Evidence of a shame that could never be spoken, only erased. The reason was obvious to everyone, even if no one dared to name it. The child's skin was lighter than it should have been. Too light to be ignored, too light to be forgiven. On that plantation, skin told stories people were desperate to bury. Joanna's heart pounded so hard she feared it would betray her, but her face remained still. She lowered her head, accepting the order as slaves were expected to do, even as something inside her cracked open quietly, like dry earth splitting beneath unseen roots. She turned away slowly, careful not to stumble, careful not to draw attention. Every step felt unreal, as though she were watching herself from a distance. The path leading away from the big house stretched ahead, dusty and exposed. The sun hung high, heavy and merciless, pressing down on her shoulders. Her arms instinctively tightened around the baby, as if her body might shield him even when her will could not. Behind her, she sensed movement. Zephyr followed, silent as a shadow, carrying an old wooden basin under her arm. It was scratched and worn, once used for food before it had been deemed unfit for the big house and discarded. On the plantation, nothing was ever truly thrown away. Objects, like people, were simply reassigned to harder purposes. They walked without speaking. The air felt thick, every sound amplified. Cicadas buzzed in the distance. Leaves rustled faintly. Each noise felt like a witness. The river came into view slowly, wide and dark, its surface broken by drifting branches and tangled roots. It moved with a steady, low murmur, a sound so constant it felt alive, like breathing. Joanna stopped at the edge, her knees trembling, her heart racing. She had been to this river countless times before, hauling water, washing cloth, standing knee-deep in its cold flow. But today it felt different, heavier, as if it already knew why she had come. She knelt down, the motion stiff and deliberate, and Zephyr placed the basin on the ground beside her. Joanna's hands shook as she lined the bottom with broad green leaves, their scent rising sharp and fresh, filling her nose with the smell of living earth. The baby stirred slightly, letting out a soft sound that barely qualified as a cry. His eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, unfocused, unaware of the weight of the world pressing down on him. Joanna brushed her fingers across his forehead, her touch trembling as she traced the shape of his tiny face. She forced herself to memorize every detail, every line and curve, because something deep inside her knew this moment was being stolen. Zephyr knelt beside her, her movements slow and reverent, as if they were standing on sacred ground. She whispered words passed down through generations, beliefs that had survived because nothing else had been allowed to. She said water does not accept innocent blood without consequence. She said rivers remember what people try to forget. Joanna listened, her jaw clenched, afraid that if she spoke, if she allowed her voice to escape, her resolve would shatter completely. Hope was dangerous, but so was despair. The basin touched the water gently at first. It rocked slightly, testing its balance. Joanna held onto it, fingers digging into the wood, her arms straining as if she could hold the entire river back by sheer will. The current tugged softly, persistent but patient. Time stretched. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, with a movement that felt both deliberate and impossibly slow, she loosened her grip. The basin drifted forward, turning once, catching the golden light of the lowering sun. The baby's eyes opened again, just for a heartbeat, and Joanna's breath caught painfully in her throat. Then the basin slid between exposed roots and shadows, disappearing from view. Joanna remained kneeling, her arms suspended in the air as if they still held him. Her chest ached, a physical pain so sharp it stole her breath. Everything inside her screamed to run after it, to throw herself into the water, to fight the current with her own body if she had to. But another voice, hardened by years of survival, whispered the cost of disobedience. Zephyr placed a hand over hers, grounding her, anchoring her back to the world she had no choice but to return to. She whispered again, quieter this time, that God does not lose children. He hides them. Joanna did not know whether to believe it, but the words sank into her like drops of rain on scorched earth. The walk back to the plantation felt endless. The path seemed longer, the air heavier. Every tree felt like it was watching her, every rustle of leaves like a warning. When the buildings finally came into view, Joanna straightened her back, lifting her chin just enough to appear composed. The overseer's gaze lingered on her as she passed, sharp and suspicious, searching for any sign of hesitation or defiance. She gave him none. In the slave quarters, women glanced up instinctively, their eyes searching her arms. Joanna kept walking. She said nothing. She sat in the darkest corner, pressing her back against the cool clay wall, closing her eyes. Her body throbbed with exhaustion. Her chest ached with milk that had nowhere to go, a cruel reminder of absence. That night, she did not sleep. The sound of the river echoed endlessly in her ears, as if calling her, as if reminding her that something had been set in motion. Morning came with a false calm. Mistress Malvina stepped onto the veranda with an air of satisfaction, repeating to anyone who would listen that order had been restored. Yet the house felt unsettled. Small imperfections irritated her beyond reason. A cloth folded incorrectly. A dish placed a finger's width out of line. Even the light seemed wrong, too sharp, too revealing. Joanna worked in silence, washing, scrubbing, carrying water, her eyes lowered, her movements careful and precise. She could feel the mistress watching her, studying every breath, every shift of weight, waiting for a crack. Joanna gave her none. Silence became her armor. But beneath that silence, pain festered. Her body ached. Her mind replayed the moment at the river again and again, the basin rocking away, the brief opening of her child's eyes. At night, whispers moved through the slave quarters. Old women murmured that the earth remembers injustice, that water carries truth, that nothing taken unjustly is ever truly lost. Joanna listened without responding, holding those words close to her chest, afraid that believing them too much might break her. Before dawn one morning, Mistress Malvina noticed something that sent a chill through her. Mud streaked the polished floor of the big house. Dark mud. Not the pale dust of the yard, but thick, heavy earth from the slave quarters. She followed the trail slowly, her heart tightening with each step until it ended at a single boot print pressed into the wood. She recognized it instantly. Her husband's. The realization crept in quietly, then struck with brutal force. Memories surged up unbidden. The baby's skin, her husband's late nights, his strange silence when she ordered the child taken. It had not been relief she had seen in his eyes. It had been fear. From that moment, the calm she pretended to feel cracked. Control turned into something darker. Obsession. The punishment came without warning. Joanna was dragged to the whipping post in front of everyone. The sun climbed higher, merciless and bright. Ropes bit into her wrists. Time stretched painfully. Each minute felt like a lifetime. The mistress stood watching, her face rigid, her voice sharp as she declared that if God wanted Joanna to cry, he would hear it. Joanna did not scream. Her pain folded inward, sinking deep, taking root where no whip could reach. The other slaves watched helplessly, their silence heavy with shared fear and buried rage. When Joanna was finally released, her body barely held her. Zephyr rushed to support her, whispering through clenched teeth that some destinies cannot be drowned. That night, as Joanna lay trembling on the dirt floor, the sound of the river returned to her, steady and relentless. Somewhere far away, unseen and unknown, the current carried more than branches and leaves. It carried a life that refused to be erased, moving quietly toward a future no one on that plantation could yet imagine. By morning, the basin had caught between the thick roots of an old tree along the riverbank. A fisherman found it there just after sunrise. He was a quiet man, accustomed to listening more than speaking, his life shaped by the rhythm of the water. At first, he thought the basin was debris. Another thing the river had claimed and returned. Then he heard the sound. Soft, fragile, alive. He knelt slowly, his heart pounding as he peered inside. The sight stopped him cold. A baby, wrapped in leaves, eyes closed, breathing. The fisherman did not question it. He did not wonder why or how. In his world, the river did not make mistakes. It delivered. He carried the child home, wrapping him carefully in his own coat. His wife gasped when she saw the baby, her hands flying to her mouth. She asked no questions either. They had buried 2 children of their own years ago, victims of fever and hunger. Loss had taught them not to challenge unexpected gifts. They named the boy Samuel, after her father, a man who believed that survival itself was a form of rebellion. Samuel grew slowly stronger, his cries turning into laughter, his small fingers gripping life with stubborn determination. He was always calm near water, falling asleep to the sound of the river as if it were a lullaby he had known before he was born. Years passed. Samuel learned to walk along the riverbank, his steps sure, his balance natural. He learned to fish, to listen to the water, to read its moods. He asked about his past sometimes, sensing the gaps in the stories told to him. The fisherman's wife would stroke his hair and say only that he belonged to the river first, and to them second. Samuel accepted this with a seriousness beyond his years. He grew tall and strong, his skin lighter than the fisherman's, but darker than the plantation owner's upriver. He did not yet understand what that meant, but the world would teach him soon enough. Back on the plantation, nothing felt right after the whipping. Joanna's body healed slowly, scars forming thick and unforgiving. But it was the silence that changed her most. She spoke less, listened more. She worked without error, without complaint. Mistress Malvina mistook this for victory. She told herself the slave had been broken. Yet unease followed her like a shadow. Crops failed without clear reason. Horses grew restless. The land itself seemed tired, as if burdened by something it could no longer carry. The master drank more, his laughter hollow, his eyes avoiding Joanna's whenever they crossed. He knew. He had always known, and the truth gnawed at him. Whispers spread among the slaves. Old stories resurfaced, spoken only at night. They said the river keeps accounts, that what is taken unjustly returns with interest. Joanna listened, her face unreadable, her heart pounding with a hope she barely allowed herself to feel. At night, when the pain in her chest returned, she would close her eyes and imagine the water moving, imagine small hands reaching, imagine breath still rising and falling somewhere far away. She never spoke the thought aloud. Some hopes were too dangerous to name. When Samuel was nearly grown, he felt a pull he could not explain, a restlessness that no amount of fishing or labor could quiet. The river no longer felt like enough. It whispered of something beyond its banks. One morning, he told the fisherman and his wife that he needed to travel. They did not try to stop him. They had always known this day would come. The wife pressed a small charm into his hand, telling him it had protected him once already. Samuel nodded, feeling a strange weight in his chest, as if he were walking towards something both terrifying and inevitable. He arrived at the plantation seeking work, his posture calm, his eyes steady. The overseer looked him up and down, noting his strength, his ambiguous skin, his refusal to avert his gaze completely. Suspicion flickered, but labor was needed, and Samuel was hired. From the moment Joanna saw him, something inside her shifted violently. Not recognition of features, not certainty, but a deep, undeniable knowing that shook her to the core. Her hands trembled as she washed clothes that day, her breath catching every time he passed. The way he walked, the way he listened, the way he paused near the river as if greeting an old friend. Her body remembered what her mind was afraid to claim. Mistress Malvina noticed him too. She felt the familiar surge of anger and fear, old and unresolved. His presence unsettled her, stirring memories she had worked hard to bury. She humiliated him publicly whenever she could, testing him, waiting for him to bow or break. Samuel did neither. He answered her with calm, measured words, never raising his voice, never lowering his dignity. Each exchange chipped away at her control, exposing cracks she could no longer hide. The master watched from a distance, his face pale, his hands trembling. The past was walking toward him, breathing, demanding to be acknowledged. One evening, Malvina went too far. She accused Samuel openly, her voice sharp with accusation and terror, hinting at sins she dared not fully name. The yard fell silent. Slaves froze. Samuel stood still, eyes locked on hers, and spoke the truth simply, without accusation, without hatred. He said he did not know his father. He said he had been given to the river and raised by its mercy. He said if she feared him, it was not because of who he was, but because of what she had done. The words landed like blows. Joanna stepped forward then, her silence finally breaking. She spoke of the order, of the basin, of the river, of the child she had been forced to surrender. Her voice did not shake. The truth unraveled quickly after that. The master collapsed under the weight of it, his guilt exposed, his authority crumbling. Malvina screamed, denied, raged, but it was too late. Power does not survive exposure, it fractures. Samuel turned to Joanna, understanding blooming in his eyes. They did not need explanations. Some bonds exist beyond memory. He embraced her, completing something that had been suspended in time for years. The river had kept its promise. Justice did not come with a single dramatic act. It came slowly, relentlessly. Land changed hands. Distance was created. The plantation weakened, its grip loosening. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was finally honest. Joanna and Samuel left together, building a life away from the river's cruelty but close to its wisdom. And the river continued to flow, unchanged in appearance, carrying stories it would never forget, whispering to anyone willing to listen that what is born of suffering does not vanish, it waits, and when the time is right, it returns. Years passed, and life far from the plantation shaped Joanna and Samuel into people neither the river nor the cruelty of others could break. The land they settled on was wild at first, overgrown fields, tangled trees, and soil thirsty for care. But the freedom it offered was intoxicating. Every morning, Joanna would walk along the banks of a gentle stream nearby, listening to the water rush over stones as if recounting its own memory. Samuel often followed her, his hands sometimes carrying tools, sometimes empty, his mind ever alert, yet at peace in a way he had never known. The river had kept its promise. Now it was time for them to claim theirs. Joanna built a small home from timber and stone, simple but sturdy, with a porch that caught the morning light and a hearth that smelled of firewood and herbs. She planted gardens with careful attention, growing vegetables, fruits, and flowers. Each seed placed in the earth felt like an act of defiance against the years of oppression she had endured. The soil accepted her care, and in return, it bore life abundantly. Samuel tended animals, fished when he could, and learned the rhythms of the land as if the river had whispered its secrets to him alone. He carried the quiet dignity of a life reclaimed, his movements precise, his decisions deliberate, shaped by struggle and mercy alike. Yet, even in freedom, the shadows of their past lingered. Joanna often woke in the night, heart racing, haunted by memories of the plantation, the screams, the threats, the bitterness of Mistress Malvina. Samuel, too, carried the weight of questions left unanswered, of moments where a child's gaze had been torn from a mother's arms. They did not speak of the past often. It was understood between them that some pains were too large to unpack in conversation. Instead, they honored those memories through the care they gave to each other, the reverence with which they treated life itself. Over time, word spread of the small homestead by the river. Neighbors came, sometimes in curiosity, sometimes seeking guidance. Joanna and Samuel welcomed them quietly, offering shelter to those in need, sharing knowledge of the land, and teaching children the ways of the river. Samuel became known not for wealth or authority, but for fairness, patience, and the uncanny ability to listen, not just with his ears, but with the heart. People said he seemed to understand more than he should, to perceive the currents of events, the tides of fate, as if the river itself spoke through him. One day, an old man visited, carrying with him a bundle of letters and a faded photograph of a young woman long gone. He had heard stories of the child the river had returned, and wished to see if legend matched truth. Joanna welcomed him, cautious but curious. Samuel stood by, silent and steady, yet a spark of recognition flickered in his eyes as he studied the visitor. The man spoke of the plantation upriver, of lands sold and families scattered, of debts unpaid and guilt unacknowledged. The tale was grim, yet Joanna's eyes held no fear. The river had returned more than a child. It had returned justice, patience, and the resilience to face such stories without crumbling. Samuel often walked to the river alone, letting the current guide his thoughts. He thought about the child he had been, the mother he had never known by sight, and the woman who had finally revealed truth. He spoke quietly to the water, asking questions about fate, about choice, about mercy. Sometimes he felt the current answer him, not in words, but in subtle signs. A fallen leaf that landed at his feet, the shimmer of sunlight on a wave, the sudden flight of birds overhead. It was as if the river reminded him that life, even after cruelty and loss, always returned balance in its own time. Joanna and Samuel raised a family of their own, children who grew strong, kind, and resilient. They told stories of survival and faith, of justice returning in ways no human hand could enforce. They taught that the river does not forget, that suffering is neither ignored nor permanent, and that love, when desperate enough, can shape destiny. The children grew up hearing of their origins, yet the lessons emphasized courage, empathy, and respect for life in all its forms. Samuel showed them how to fish, Joanna how to tend the land, but both taught them more importantly how to live in harmony with the truth of their past. As the years moved on, Mistress Malvina and Ciariano faded from their story, figures reduced to whispers carried on the wind, and warnings passed down through older generations. The plantation they had once ruled decayed slowly, its fields barren, its house crumbling, its legacy tarnished. Those who remained remembered only the oppressive weight that had once dominated them. Some said it was punishment. Others claimed it was the natural course of justice. Joanna and Samuel, however, knew it was the river, patient, steady, and unwavering, that had ensured balance was restored. In the quiet of their home, Joanna often reflected on the river's lessons, how it had taken the child she had been forced to release, only to return him stronger, wiser, and alive. How life itself, when nurtured with care and courage, resists even the darkest of attempts to destroy it. Samuel would sit beside her, hands intertwined, his presence a constant reminder of the river's mercy. Together, they understood that their survival was not merely personal. It was a testament to the strength of resilience, the power of truth, and the unyielding will of life itself. The river continued to flow past their land, whispering stories to anyone willing to listen. Travelers would pause. Children would stare in wonder, and sometimes in moments of quiet reflection, Joanna and Samuel could feel the pulse of the water echoing through their hearts. They understood that destiny is neither swift nor merciless. It is measured, deliberate, and patient. It is the unseen force that corrects what has been wronged, returns what has been lost, and ensures that life, in all its forms, continues to move forward. By the time Joanna and Samuel were old, their children grown and raising families of their own, the land had transformed into a sanctuary. Fields were lush, gardens abundant, and the river's edge thrummed with vitality. People from far and wide would visit, seeking guidance, solace, or simply to witness the peace that seemed to radiate naturally from the place. Samuel taught them to listen to the river, to understand its silence, and Joanna shared stories of courage and truth. Every story, every lesson, was a thread in the tapestry of resilience and justice that had been spun over decades. In the evenings, Joanna would sit on the porch, looking at the sun sinking below the horizon, the river glinting like molten gold. Samuel would join her, their hands finding each other naturally, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had survived and the life they had reclaimed. The final lesson was simple yet profound. The river returns what is owed, what is deserved, and what is sacred. It never forgets, never betrays, and never fails. Joanna and Samuel had been entrusted with life, with love, with survival, and they had honored that trust. They passed it down to their children, and through them, to generations that would follow. And as the sun set each day, the river whispered its eternal reminder that truth, courage, and love are forces stronger than any whip, any order, any cruelty, and that life, in the end, always finds a way to restore balance. By the time they passed on, Joanna and Samuel had become legends in their own right. People spoke of the mother and child the river returned, of a family that transformed suffering into strength, of lands blessed not by wealth but by justice and integrity. Their legacy endured not because of power or riches, but because they honored life, bore truth, and followed the currents of destiny with unyielding faith. The river continued to flow, steady and unwavering, carrying with it the story of a mother, a child, and the justice that time and nature always ensure. It whispered through reeds, glinted over stones, and sang beneath the moonlight. It reminded all who listened that the world may try to drown what is innocent, suppress what is rightful, and hide what is sacred, but nothing that is meant to survive will ever be lost forever. And so the story ended not with vengeance, not with tears, but with life reclaimed, love restored, and a legacy that outlasted cruelty, hatred, and fear. The river had returned the child. It had returned justice, and it had returned hope, flowing eternally through the hearts of all who remembered its power.